Today we're going to learn about the passive voice of the perfect system. But before we jump into forming this, let's look at the principal parts of our verb. Today we're going to use woka, wokare, wokawi, wokatum. Now we've said before that that second principal part there in blue, our infinitive, is used for the stem for the present system of the active and passive voice. Our third principal part here in green, wokawi, is going to be used for the stem of the perfect system of the active voice. Today we're going to be working with the perfect system, the passive voice, however, and for that we're going to use this fourth principal part, wokatum, in orange. And wokatum actually works exactly like an adjective. Here it's shown in its neuter form only when you get the four principal parts of a verb. However, it can be seen as wokatus, wokata, wokatum. Remember, this is just like a three-part adjective, so wokatus is the masculine, wokata is the feminine, and wokatum is the neuter. Now we're using this as part of a compound verb, so we're only going to want to use the nominative forms. So if our subject is masculine, we're going to use wokatus in the singular, and of course wokati in the plural. If our subject is feminine, we're going to use wokata in the singular, and wokatai in the plural. And if our subject is neuter, we'll use wokatum in the singular and wokata in the plural. And when we go to our verb charts, this will be much clearer. So here's our verb chart for the perfect tense of the passive. Remember, the perfect tense is the first of three tenses that make up the perfect system, the other two tenses being the pluperfect and the future perfect tense. So when we're forming this, we're going to go to that fourth principal part, wokatum. And as we just said, wokatum is actually acting like a three-part adjective, wokatus, wokata, wokatum. And for now, we're going to start with just the masculine form. A bit sexist, but we'll do the other forms in a second. So, we're going to take that fourth principal part, and it's going to be a compound verb, so you're going to add another word to it, and we're going to start by using our verb to be in the present. So what we're going to add to it is sum, es, and est in the singular, and sumus, estis, sunt in the plural. Note that wokatus changes to wokati in the plural because wokatus is the nominative singular of the masculine second declension, while wokati is the nominative plural. So, wokatus sum is I have been called, wokatus es is you have been called, and wokatus est is he has been called. Then going to the plural, wokati sumus, we have been called, wokati estis, y'all have been called, and wokati sunt, they have been called. Remember, we're using this for masculine subjects. If we're going to use this for feminine subjects, we're going to use wokata, the second form of the three-part adjective. So, we have wokata sum, I have been called, wokata es, you have been called, wokata est, she has been called. Then when we move into that plural, we're going to have wokatai. Once again, because we're using nominative forms only, wokata in the singular is the nominative of the first declension, and of course the nominative plural of the first declension is that ae ending. So we have wokatai sumus, we have been called, wokatai estis, y'all have been called, and wokatai sunt, they have been called. And we can also see this in the neuter. Here we're going to use wokatum in the singular, and the nominative plural of that second declension, neuter, is wokata, which we're going to use for all the plural forms. So we have wokatum sum, wokatum es, wokatum est, wokatum sumus, wokata estis, and wokata sunt. Remember, this is a two-part verb, so we have two separate words. This sum ss, sumus estis, sunt is not an ending, it is a second word entirely to form the perfect tense of the passive. Next, we have the pluperfect tense of the passive voice. Now, once again, we're going to go to that fourth principal part, wokatus a. In this case, we're just going to use the masculine as an example. And now we're going to use eram, eras, erat, eramus, eratus, erant as our helping verb. So these two words together, that fourth principal part, plus eram, eras, erat, eramus, eratus, erant, make up the pluperfect tense of the passive. It's a compound verb. The way this is translated is wokatus eram, I had been called, wokatus eras, you had been called, wokatus erat, he had been called, Vocati eramus, we had been called. Vocati eratus, y'all had been called. And vocati erant, they had been called. And we move on to the future perfect tense, which is also following the same pattern. We're going to use that fourth principal part. Remember, once again, it changes for gender, depending on what the gender of your subject is. Right now, we're just going to use the masculine. And our helping verb this time is going to be ero, eris, erit, eremus, eritus, erunt. So when you put it all together, you get vocatus ero, I will have been called. Vocatus eris, you will have been called. Vocatus erit, he will have been called. Vocati erimus, we will have been called. Vocati eritus, y'all will have been called. And vocati erunt, they will have been called. And here's the chart of the perfect system in its entirety, so you can get a sense of what it looks like all together. Got on the left the perfect tense, in the center the pluperfect, and on the right the future perfect tense. Now remember, when you use the perfect system of the passive voice, or for that matter any passive verb, the subject is having the action of the verb done to it. It is not doing the action. So, in Latin we have this thing called the ablative of personal agent to tell you who is doing the action of a passive verb. And the way it's formed is you use a or ab plus a person or animal in the ablative. You're going to use a with nouns that start with a consonant and ab with nouns that start with a vowel. And what this is doing is telling you who's doing the action. Now don't get this confused with an ablative of means, which tells you with what the action is being done. That's going to not use a person or an animal, that's going to use an item or an object. So, for an example, we have pueri a femina vocata erant. The boys had been called by the woman. Note that pueri, the boys, are the subject, and vocati erant, the verb, goes with them. But they are being called. They're not doing the calling. Who's doing the calling? The woman, a femina. Your ablative of personal agent tells you who's doing the action of a passive verb. Alright, time for a little practice. Here are 3 sentences. I'd like you to translate them and pay special attention to the tense of the passive voice, as well as how the ablative of personal agent is used in each. Take a moment to pause the recording and work on these, and we'll review when you're done. So, number 1, insula a nautis pugnata est is, the island has been attacked by the sailors. So if you look, insula is feminine, so that's why we use pugnata, the feminine singular form of the fourth principal part, when forming the verb. Also, who's doing the attacking? A nautis, your ablative of personal agent, is telling you who is attacking the island. It's telling you who's doing the action of the passive verb. Number 2, verba a nuntio portata erunt. The words will have been carried by the messenger. Once again, verba is your subject and it's neuter plural. So what form of the fourth principal part do we need? The neuter plural. And who's carrying these words? The messenger, a nuntio, our ablative of personal agent. And finally, number 3, agricolae a sociis liberati erant. The farmers had been freed by the allies. Note that the farmers are masculine plural, and that's why we need to use liberati, the masculine plural form of the fourth principal part, when forming the verb. And who's doing the freeing? A sociis, our ablative of personal agent. So what are our takeaways from this lesson? The main one is you need to start memorizing your perfect system of the passive voice and get it down. Remember, it uses the fourth principal part. The fourth principal part forms like a 3-part adjective, however, and you need to use the right form that agrees with the gender and number of your subject. And the only other takeaway is that if you're wondering who's doing the action of this passive verb, the way that you find it in Latin is by finding the ablative of personal agent, a or ab plus a person or animal or some sort of sentient being in the ablative case.